Okay, good evening. It is Wednesday, October the 9th, 2019, and welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Corrections. I am Professor Richard Wright, and I am going to take the time to share with you the assignments for week 2 and your assignment for week 3, just to remind you, because there is no lecture during week 3. As you recall, your lectures are weeks 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. And here we are. And so again, this is information that I won't repeat. Remind you that your rubrics are located in each weekly written assignment and the course projects. And then this is the generic discussion post rubric, which I've explained in detail. Again, this is the link for the live lecture. Of course, if you are here, you know that. And that your lectures take place every other Wednesday from this point on, beginning tonight, which is October the 9th. And so then you'll see week 4, 2 weeks from today, week 6, 8, and then the final lecture will be week 10. Here is your open house lecture, which you should have by now. And it's very lengthy, but this one is going to be much shorter and from this point out. So you could copy and paste, and then after this you'll see week 2. So now let's go to, I remind you again, I gave you the link in an announcement as well as emailed to you the open house, and encourage you to listen to the open house for details concerning the very important course project and how to organize it. And then coming down here, your welcome announcement, of course, and your new student resources. So there's a link to some very important information concerning upcoming webinars to benefit all students, but especially new students. And you can click on that, and you will find that information. So now let's take a look at our announcement for the week. This week we'll deal with sentencing and the correctional process. And to prepare for that, you read section 4 of the corrections text, and I also sent you the PowerPoints that accompany that give you information to help you, as well as the activity, which I'm going to discuss, sentencing issue and sentencing definitions. And remind you again, when your lectures take place every other Wednesday, which I gave you the schedule a few minutes ago. And then finally, you got 2 other things: your discussion assignment, goals and philosophy of sentencing. Some students don't understand that discussion assignment. So when I get to the discussion post in a few minutes, I'll be providing details on that. Of course, the initial post is due last night, and your reply post is due by this Saturday, October the 12th at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And finally, your written assignments, determinate or indeterminate sentencing. I'll go into details of that. And then the very first course project, which is selection of agency contact person. So you want to make sure that you get that information as well. Okay. So hi, Brian. How are you? You can hear me, but you need to turn off your video, because your video is going to take up too much of the memory. There you go. Right. Yeah, it does something when students put the videos on. I like to see my students, but it takes up a lot of the recording, and somehow or another when it records, it's garbly. So as I was saying, the course project, selection of agency/contact person is the first part of your written assignment for the course project, first of 4. The next one will be week 4, then the one after that will be week 7, and actually then the final one will be week 9. So I've already shared with you that I want you to start strong and finish strong. In other words, remain strong throughout this course. The definition of that is pretty much getting your assignments, following the rubrics, following the instructions I give. If you need clarification, reach out to me. I've already told you how to reach out to me. I told you when you can't reach out to me. You know the answer to that question. And then I remind you why I say that my motto is adversity is a springboard to success. And you know that because of my very detailed story that I gave you about my life. You should be aware, by the way, that that story was actually a shortened version. There is a longer version that I am preparing for a book, and or someone may be interested in doing a movie on it as well. So be on the lookout for that as well. So now let's go into the course calendar. I always go over the course calendar every week that I have lectures. And so you see where we are here. You see your reading assignment, which is right here. You click on that. Then your initial post, which was due last night, on goals and philosophy of sentencing. And then your live lecture, which is taking place now. Your reply post, the 12th, due this Saturday. And then Sunday, your written assignment that I will go over in detail, and your course project here. And then next week, you'll have your reading assignment, your initial post, your reply post, and then you'll have a written assignment and a quiz. And you've already had one quiz that was due in week 1. You will have 5 altogether, so the second one will take place in week number 3. Week 3, not 2, but week 3. And I encourage you that when you take the quiz to go over the materials, look at the PowerPoint, and of course do the reading. And then if there's a lecture that week, you listen to the lecture, which there won't be for week 3. And then you complete all that information studied, put the books and paper and notes and everything away, because it is a closed book quiz, and you know that it is a time quiz that is 10 minutes, basically 1 minute for each question. And take your time, but go through carefully and read the questions very carefully. And once you get to 10 minutes, one of 2 things are going to happen. It's going to shut down, and your final score will be submitted immediately to me, as well as yourself. Now, be aware that I don't write the quizzes. I don't make up any of the tests. The course development team does that, and I try to follow and make sure that they follow the material, and they're pretty good with that kind of thing. So that's that, so you can keep the calendar. And of course, I do remind you again that the course calendar is available. You can go ahead and look at it all the way to the end of the course. This is November, and then you will see that the course actually ends on Friday the 13th of December, which comes pretty fast. People, get relaxed. They don't realize it. Some of you, because you have 5.5 classes now, which is, by the way, this is supposed to be the last quarter. I've been informed that this course, Introduction to Corrections, will be a 11-week course. It will then go to 5.5. I have no idea what that course is going to look like until they send me the preliminary stuff to look at it, and then I'll have it. But anyway, be aware the course ends on the 13th. Some people will think that it ends the 15th, but it is not. It's going to end December 13th. So again, you know, students say, why do I keep repeating that? The reason why I repeat it over and over, the ending of a course, is because I inevitably have students who come back and say to me, I thought that all assignments were due on that Sunday. Well, not with week 11. It'll be due that Friday. Okay. So I'm done with that. So now I'm going to go over and discuss what we have for this week to help you be brought up to speed. First of all, I'm going to discuss the assignments. And the first assignment is a written assignment that is called determinate or indeterminate sentencing. Right up front, it tells you the number of pages. It should be 2 pages. You should know that it should be an APA format. I've already discussed that in detail. As well, it should be double space, people, not single space. A couple of you submitted papers in week 1 that I looked at, and I will be finished grading your week 1 assignments by Friday. I'm going to start working on some of them tonight, as soon as I finish this lecture. And so make sure that you satisfy the APA requirement, and also that if you need some resources, use the online library, which is available through the resources tab, which I discussed last week. And again, the dates, it says check your course calendar, you know that, but then also when we click on this in a minute, you'll see the due date as well. So the 2-page paper is going to, first of all, require that you will do some research in the state that you reside and report in your paper whether your state utilizes determinate or indeterminate sentencing structures, and include the philosophy for their decision. And then second, argue or provide information of which of these 2 types of sentencing options you believe is more effective and why. So basically, you're going to discuss your state's determinate or indeterminate sentencing structure, provide details, and then you're going to then present which of the 2 types of sentences, determinate or indeterminate sentences, which you believe is the most effective and why. And that should be in a 2-page paper, double-spaced with APA format. And so now here is the rubric that you click on the assignment itself, and it opens it up. Assignment information tells you the due date, which I've already previously given to you, and then it tells you the possible points. To get 25 points, you have to, and then here's the rubric that I will be using to grade you. And usually your rubric will start out with the quality, content, and accuracy. That section will vary according to each assignment. The second section and the third section will not vary. You should be familiar with it because it's going to set forth the requirements. So what this does is it repeats what I just told you a few minutes ago, and it also reminds you of the 2-page minimum requirement. So to get 15 points, you want to provide these details. You want to have the proper amount of pages if you don't want to lose the points for having adequate page information. And just so you know, student asked me, why is it important for us to do the number of pages? We've determined that based on the way to provide the information properly and adequately to address the issues in each assignment, the page minimum is there for that purpose. And it tells you what it is in the rubric, and I also mention it to students as well in the lectures that I do. So you're going to make sure that you do it in paragraph form. And you know, I tell students all the time, paragraphs should be no more than 5 to 6 sentences. I've had students who've given me papers that the whole paper was 1 complete paragraph, and that's not the way you're taught or your proper format for a paragraph. Paragraphs should be about a topic, and then you finish that topic, and then you go to the next paragraph to start another topic or deal with another issue. So 5 points for that. And then, of course, the APA. This is where students lose so many points because it requires APA format, and I've already described it. But once again, you're reminded in here that you have to have a cover page, you have to have a reference page, you have to have proper spacing and paragraph, which, by the way, your paragraph should be no more than 1 inch on each side. And from the top to the bottom, it should be squared in the information. But your paper, that is, I'm saying, and double space. And you should make sure you have the proper in-text citations. And we provided enough sources or resources to help you to do that. And then to properly format your reference page as well. And then make sure you use credible resources. And one of the best ways to do that is use our Library and Learning Center. Wikipedia is one of the things that I've seen students use over and over and over, or generic resources like that. You will lose points for that because we're dealing with information literacy. Remember, one of the transferable skills there. So that's how you get your 25 points, okay? If you do some of this, if you, for example, have citations and not references, you're still going to lose 5 points because it's not APA. APA is not partially right. I don't give credit for APA when it comes to having it partially. I give full credit when it's done properly. When it's not done properly, it's not like you're half right. No, you're either right or you're wrong when it comes to APA. That's the way I teach students. There are a few professors who may give points, and then there are some professors that don't do APA. And then, of course, finally, one of the things I do remind students, and it's not in here, but I've said it before, run your papers through Grammarly, and I've discussed that as well. And if you need some clarification on that, you could go to the Resources tab and click on Grammarly and run your papers through, and then check the box for plagiarism. Where plagiarism can occur, where you don't have enough critical thinking, and where you have just simply basically copy and pasted the material, put it together, maybe said a few words or so. No, your information that you get from your research, your resources presented should be under, I should say, the critical thinking analysis that we're looking for in all papers, because it is so important. And I tell students all the time who get Grammarly hits. And the other thing you should be aware of, when you get hit with Grammarly, I not only take away the points, but I also give you, I have to report it as a infraction to the school. And after so many, they will drop you from the course. And then if you're doing it in other classes as well, professors are supposed to do the same thing. They will drop you from the school. The idea is the school wants to make sure that you're satisfying the requirements to be professional when you graduate. And one of them is critical thinking. I already told you last week my thing and spin about the importance of critical thinking. Employers really want people who are good at that, okay? So that's the assignment number 1. The assignment number 2 was a course project, but I'll skip that in a minute. And we're going to discuss the goals and philosophy of sentencing. Now, I had a student that sent me and says he didn't understand what this is all about. Well, it starts off by telling you that last week what we covered in the discussion post. And then you presented your goal as to the one that you liked the most. And, you know, so these goals, such as retribution, rehabilitation, deterrence, reintegration, and so forth. And so this week, you recognize that the goals that you presented have certain drawbacks, and ethical considerations that impact the philosophy of sentencing. So this week, your posts are going to decide, identify which goal you selected and at least 2 drawbacks of that goal that you selected from last week, and or ethical considerations that should go into your response post. So in your response post 2, you're going to reply to a student who selected a drawback other than the one that you have yourself. So if you have rehabilitation and you talk about the drawbacks of rehabilitation, then you also, in your reply post, are going to include another one, like retribution or deterrence, those kinds of things. So that's the understanding that you should have for this discussion forum. And I've already told you when the initial post is due and when the reply post. Now let me give you the spin for this week's course project, which I discussed in detail last week, each of the weeks from week 2, week 4, week 2, week 4, week 7, and week 9. And so the first assignment that relates to the course project is a very simple one, and you're supposed to come up with an agency. Now, I already told you during week 1 what agencies that you can use. And you can only use these 4 in this class because it is a corrections class. And those 4 agencies are either jails or prisons, probation, or parole. Do not use any others. Inevitably, I have students every quarter that automatically start trying to do law enforcement or police. They want to write about the courts, they want to write about attorneys, they want to write about other issues, but that is not going to fly. You're going to get a big fat 0 because right off the bat you select an inappropriate agency. So once you have selected that agency, in a paragraph or 2, you're going to describe the agency that you have selected. Did you hear me say a paragraph or 2? Include a sentence or 2 in that paragraph as to why you picked that agency. Then in another paragraph, identify the person. Did you hear me? The person. Don't say, I decided I'm going to do probation, I'm going to interview a probation officer. You're going to lose points because, okay, good. Tell me the probation officer's name. You will interview at this agency and their contact information. And their contact information is usually their email and contact number. That's the information that's generally there. All right? So it's very, very, very important. Now, if you don't have contact number, that's fine. Email, everybody has that. And so the point of the matter is the preferred method is to have the phone number as well as the email information. So when you make your initial contact, which you should have done based on what I was talking about week 1, you will have the opportunity to demonstrate the transferable skill of communication. As I said throughout the lecture last week, that the transferable skills will be utilized throughout this course as well as it should be used in other courses. So you're going to make sure that you're professional in terms of your communication or contact with them. It is not necessary, as one student has already asked me about, okay, that's fine. If you just add the phone number, that's fine. But the email is good as well, but you'll get all your points if you had that. The key thing is that you provided the information that let me know, number 1, you have an agency, number 2, why you selected that agency, 3, that you have a person in that agency, and then their contact information. That's where we are with this assignment. Now, I am not going to be so tough with students regarding the requirement of citations and references in this assignment. Be aware of that. So I'm going to take points off if you don't have citations and references, and this does not require you have a full page or any of those kinds of things. So if you have your camera on, turn your camera off. So I just see your initials. I see we've been joined by a student, and so make sure your camera is off, because it's going to create a situation where the recording is going to come out wobbly. So I've already muted you in terms of your mic, but I want to make sure that you do that. So anyway, so that's the assignment for week 2 for the course. Now, okay, I see there's a raised hand. And so what's the question? If you want to type it in the chat box, I'll see the question. So tell me what it is, and then I'll address it. If it has to do with your video, all you do is click on that little thing in there that looks like a camera, and it will turn off your video in terms of your video, and then you click on it, then your camera will close up. So I don't see the question, I just see a hand raised, so I don't know what that's about. So anyway, let me go ahead and show you the rubric for this assignment. Again, it's due Sunday the 15th, and here is the rubric. And the rubric tells you exactly what I just got through discussing in detail about the requirements for this assignment. And then notice it doesn't have the number of pages, because I'm not grading people on the number of pages. And I'm not really, don't worry too much about APA here, because you won't end up having problems as far as APA is concerned. Okay, so that's that assignment. Okay, and that's the assignments for the week. All right, let me see if I can see anything in the chat box. Oh, okay, I see just one thing. So, okay, so I'm okay there. Okay, good, you got it. All right, so I see that the camera has been turned off. So now let's go into the lessons tab, which I always go to the lessons content to get my information that I'm going to use for lecture, and then you can get information other than your assignment. A lot of students just go to the assignments and they don't go to this, and they don't get the objectives, and then they don't get a reiteration. So we're going to talk about sentencing issues in just a second. Sentencing definitions. We've already covered the written assignment, determinate or indeterminate sentencing. We've also already covered the goals and philosophy of sentencing in the discussion post. And then we've also covered the term requirement for the course project. Now, let me say this about the course project one time too. Whatever you have for each section of the assignment, weeks 2, weeks 4, and week 7, you should save that information, because, well, you should save it anyway, but you're going to take that information and use that when you get to week 9. And what I have recommended to students, and I'll say this again for organization purposes, to make your paper smoother, easier for me to follow, is if you have a section of that, you should have a section that says selection of agency / contact person, and then have the information that's required for week 2 under there. When you get to week 4, you're going to have one for that assignment. whatever that title is. And I'm not going to say it now, but you can look at it. Week 7, and then week 9, you're going to tie those 3 together. Week 2, week 4, and week 7 in your paper. Then you're going to go to the next section where you're going to satisfy the requirements that are mentioned in there. And there's some topics that involve research and credible sources. You'll see that when we get to that. All right, so we're quite a ways away from that. But I just want to remind you that when you finish week 2 and week 4 and week 7 and you get to week 9, just remember how do I start my final paper? Start your final paper by setting up captions for those sections. Simple as that. All right. A lot of people miss that, so I'm saying that now. All right. Now, so let's talk about sentencing. Sentencing is something that comes about in corrections. Of course, you don't enter into corrections until you do something wrong. All right, and to determine whether or not you did something wrong is going to be reached by either a plea of guilty or a determination of guilt by a judge or jury. Once you are deemed to have committed the offense, then you are transferred over into the corrections section, and you will be engaged with one of the 4 things that I talked about: jail, prison, probation, or parole. Now, be aware that people might find jail for a short period of time while awaiting trial. Remember, I'm not talking about that part. I'm not talking about while you're awaiting trial or pre-pleas or before you've pled guilty. That doesn't count from what I'm talking about. So you're not sentenced until you reach the determination that you did something wrong. So now, once you get to that particular point, there are various processes that the jurisdictions have to determine how they're going to handle you. Now, you should be aware that jail is a place where individuals generally are incarcerated who have sentences imposed on them that are less than a year, or short term, as we use the term. Prison is long term, anything a year or over. Probation is when you could have gone to jail for a little bit, but your ultimate determination after you've been found guilty or pled guilty is that you committed an offense that qualifies you not to go to jail, but to give you a second chance. And so probation is that second chance where you are then placed under the jurisdiction of the state, of course, and that you will have a probation officer that you will report to regarding your residence, your employment, your education, and basically as long as your life is on that. And generally that probation lasts the length of the sentence that you could have received if you were incarcerated. Now that could be a sentence that could have qualified you for probation, for jail, which is less than a year, or it could be one that qualified you for prison. And generally, just so you know, misdemeanors generally is what gets you to jail, and felonies get you to prison. Now that doesn't mean just because you commit a felony that you won't find yourself receiving probation. Then the final one is if you are incarcerated in not jail, but in prison, and you are released before your sentence is completely served, then you are turned over to the parole department, or some jurisdictions call it, as Illinois calls it, the mandatory supervised release department. And the bottom line is that you once again have the same kind of thing that you have with parole probation rather, where you report to now a parole officer. And the difference here is that probation is determined by a judge. Parole may be determined by a statute or a law that's on the books, and or whether or not you get that parole based on whether or not you have determinate or indeterminate sentencing. And we're going to talk about that in just a few seconds. So I've kind of explained to you what sentencing involves. And so with sentencing, what we have decided is that there are certain goals that we want to accomplish by sentencing individuals. And the key thing that you should be aware of is the more severe the offense that you, or serious the offense, the greater the sentence should be. So we have a system that's based on the original idea of deterrence. And the theory behind the deterrence sentencing position is that people will not commit crimes because they fear punishment. And that is something, the theory that, okay, yeah, if I do this crime, I'm going to do the time, and so I'm not going to do the crime. And so the belief that the fear of punishment will deter or prevent crime. However, it is one of the most disliked and has been established through many studies, and over time, my experience has been what this second line says: in reality, most criminals are never caught and punished, so deterrence is not as effective. And individuals who are caught, deterrence is not a factor because they think they're not going to get caught. So remember what the definition of a criminal is. A definition of a criminal is a person who has been found guilty or pled guilty to committing a crime. You are not a criminal before that takes place. Then you become a criminal, all right? And so, again, then you're going to be placed in the correction agency or the correction system. So now there's another system other than deterrence, is what we call incapacitation. The theory behind incapacitation is that you are isolated, and that would assist in preventing crime. Well, yes and no. It will deter you from committing crimes outside of prison if you're incapacitated, that is, if you're in jail or prison. But when you come out, you're going to go back to it if we haven't addressed the problems that put you there in the first place. So incapacitation, and the other thing is this: you know, and I know, or you'll be aware of, or you will learn, that individuals who are incapacitated or incarcerated commit crimes while they're behind the walls. And so that oftentimes extends their term as well. So it is, as it says here, it does assist for the period that the person is incarcerated, but research has shown that incapacitation does not reduce recidivism. The term recidivism means that you will come out and you will commit crime over again. Now, there are a number of reasons why we have recidivists, and I will not get into those in detail, but we have issues such as not addressing the reason why that person was in there. Maybe they had a drug problem, maybe they had an alcohol problem, maybe they didn't have the opportunity to get an education, maybe they didn't have an opportunity to have a vocation or a way to support themselves or their family. And so the more educated a person is, the less likely that there be recidivists. And I have participated in programs like that provide opportunities for students to get an education, such as there was an organization that became law in Illinois called Probation Challenge. So if you came before the judge and the judge could sentence you to probation, and that means that you committed an offense that qualified you for that, and it's determined that you have not obtained received a high school diploma or obtained a GED, to give you an opportunity to get a GED as part of your sentence. And if you successfully get your GED, you come before the judge again, then the charges are dropped. Now that's good. And we have discovered, because I was involved with the program Probation Challenge, that individuals who were educated and got their GEDs decreased in committing crime if the reason why they did it is because they had no educational problems, no vocational issue, no ability to get a job, and no vocational skills. However, it does not address drug, alcohol problems of that nature. So anyway, that brings me now to the next method that or system of sentencing, and that brings us to the concept of rehabilitation. You will discover that yours truly, I'm not telling you have to, I strongly believe in the concept of rehabilitation, because the idea of rehabilitation, as it says here, is to change the direction of that individual, change their behavior, their attitude, character, and reduce their likelihood to reoffend or be a recidivist. And I just told you some of them: education and vocation. You decrease that kind of things. Some people commit crimes to support their drug habits. That's why I said addressing that. And so, as a matter of fact, if you ever take my drug and crime course, you will discover that there is a strong correlation between crime and drugs. So anyway, the point of the matter is that the theory of rehabilitation is one. Now, of course, every one of these have drawbacks, okay? But here's the deal. Our system of laws, our system of courts, our determination of the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal cases, preponderance of the evidence in civil cases, have drawbacks. However, we weigh and determine which is best. And what is best for us is the system that we have here. And so I believe that rehabilitation is good, because what you do is you take that person and you give them what I call a 180, not a 360, a 180. Now, if you think for a minute what I'm saying, you start at 12, that's at the top. If you go to the right in the clock, then you get to 3 o'clock. That right there is 90 degrees. Now, you can get to 90, but the problem with 90 is that you're heading in the right direction and could see it to your right, but to your left where you came from, you can still see the negative. So you still have it in view. But then let's move down to the bottom of the clock, which is 6. Then you're at 6, and you're facing a whole different direction in life, and you're going away from the things that got you in trouble, and then that's what we refer to when we say rehabilitation. So my goal as an understanding and best to decrease the number of individuals, decrease the overcrowding, is to focus on rehabilitation. And rehabilitation has to do with addressing the problem that brought those individuals to prison or jail in the first place. Now, there are many philosophies that are the basis for sentencing. So, and sentences are typically imposed by a judge. Now, there are some, and it says typically, because those of you who followed the case in Dallas, Texas, of that police officer who shot and killed that young man and who was just sentenced to 10 years, be aware that those 10 years were not handed out by the judge in that case. They were handed out by the jury. And so the jury determines that. So there are sentences that are imposed by judges, but in most cases, or typically, it is the judge who determines it. And what happens in a situation as far as sentences are concerned, just so you understand the process, which is a little extra from some of this stuff here, is that one of the first things is that the probation department orders what we call a PSI, which is a pre-sentence investigation. And the purpose of that pre-sentence investigation is to determine the history of your contact with the system. And it goes and looks at, you know, how much you've been in trouble or lack of being in trouble, what kind of person you are, and so forth and so on. How even you did in school. Did you have trouble in school, and those kind of things. And so then that's utilized in a hearing that takes place with the judge, and there is what we call aggravated factors presented during that hearing. Aggravated factors are things that aggravate the sentence, which means the more severe the crime the individual committed does an aggravating. Mitigating factors are things that you did good. Maybe you didn't have contact with the system before. Maybe that you made a mistake in terms of what you did. Of course you did, but the point of the matter is that maybe you're a first timer and your tendencies have not, and you're not a repeat offender. Those kind of things. So that's that would be aggravating. But mitigation is something that says, hey, judge, this is why I should get the minimum that you can give me, because the sentence is going to be determined by the next thing that I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so that's kind of like a thumbnail sketch of how sentencing works. So then there is a debate about what is best, indeterminate or determinate sentencing. Now, in indeterminate sentencing, the judge does not have as much control over what your sentence will be. For example, I guess I'll say this, and I'll say it, and it's going to help people who are in Illinois. Sorry, I can't help you others. Is that in Illinois, Illinois is now a determinate sentence state. But in the indeterminate sentencing meant that, wait a minute, I said that wrong. Indeterminate sentencing, the judge's discretion is wider. Okay, there could even be a reduction, but in the determinate sentencing, the statute sets out how much time you can get for an offense. Illinois went from indeterminate to determinate sentencing in 1978. And I know well because in 1977, when I was a senior in law school, my project was what we call House Bill 1500. And House Bill 1500 set out a change in Illinois from indeterminate to determinate sentencing. And it was the first major change in the sentencing structure since 1961 in the Illinois Criminal Code. And I helped research, I helped write that as my senior project. So you're going to determine in your jurisdiction which one do you have, why you have it, what it's all about, which one you think is best, even if you disagree. Now, sentencing guidelines can determine as limit a judge's discretion when the guidelines include what we call presumptive sentencing. That is that the judge can't go beyond. For example, if you committed what we call a Class X felony in Illinois, your range is 6 to 30. So a judge can't go below 6 and can't go above 30. So that is, sounds like it says, well, it sounds like that is still indeterminate. Nope, it's not indeterminate. It's determined because the statute already set it out. Well, the judge has to follow what the statute has set out as far as your guidelines for sentencing in your jurisdiction. So a judge can, as it says, further be limited by mandatory minimum sentences by what I just said a few minutes ago, as, for example, using the Class X crime. And we usually explain to people that there are pros and cons about which one is better. Now, you know what I told you about what happened to the guy who killed my parents. I told you he was sentenced to, at that time, 10 years. But at that time, 10 years was what the judge said he should get because they worked the deal. He pled guilty. But in that law, at that time, they had what they call good time, which they still have for some crimes. But now for the severe crimes like murder, you might not have that. Manslaughter or second-degree murder, you might have that. But my point being is that, so this guy served 5 years right off the bat, but for good behavior, while he's incarcerated, they also shortened the time and released him after 3.5 years. And so my point being is that if this was a determinate sentencing situation, he might not have gotten out. And for what he did, he might not have had good time involved there as well. So the good time issue has been pushed out, and then they have this other thing that if you commit 3 violent offenses, the third one, then they have what they call habitual offender acts. This is described generally in determinate sentencing in today's system. So those are just a few things that I would pass out to you. I told you the lectures are important because I give you information that you won't find in your book, or I'll elaborate on it more. And so it's important to understand, as it says here at the bottom, the sentencing options as the role of corrections carries out and enforces the orders in both the community, which is probation and parole. So that's when you're out in the community, as I said earlier, and then institutionalized or locked up behind bars, jail, and prison settings. So that's it for sentencing issues. So that's the theory behind what incarceration is doing, what I have shared with you. So now I want to conclude by sharing with you a little bit about some terms that you should be aware of. Now, people, pay close attention. This is sentencing definitions, and you need to know these because they're going to pop up sometime, and they pop up sometime on quizzes. Even though there's no quiz this week, next week you might see some of these, okay? But just be aware that you need to know them. So what is general deterrence? We've already talked about deterrence, and here's the definition of general deterrence. Punishment to prevent others from committing crimes with the idea that punishing them will deter others who are contemplating criminal acts. So we kind of basically, when we talk about deterrence, we're generally talking about, sounds funny, general deterrence. So that's usually what we're talking about. But there is what we call specific deterrence, and focuses on the individual, and then said that the offender should learn that crime does not pay as a result. Again, that's not something that criminals think of before they commit crimes. So either general or specific deterrence, neither one of them is something that is like a big ticket to cut into recidivism. Incapacitation, we've talked about that. Physically or restraining or isolating the person to protect society. In short, behind bars. Selective incapacitation is repeat offenders are sentenced for longer prison terms. We talked about that earlier. So the aggravating factors that come out in your PSI, which I talked about, pre-sentence investigation, can get you a longer prison term. But remember, that's controlled by which sentencing system you have, determinate or indeterminate sentencing. Rehabilitation, you always see a smile whenever I talk about that. Changing the behavior, attitudes, beliefs, or character to diminish their criminal propensities. I already have gone over that in detail, and that's my preferred method of dealing with people. Rehabilitation is like giving a person a second chance, or giving them an opportunity, or recognizing, and this is where I approached it as a criminal defense lawyer, because of what I went through with my parents, is representing individuals that these were sick people, and these people needed deliverance, and they needed to be guided in a new direction. And so as a result, I learned very quickly that the way that you're going to fix this is not with more laws, but with fixing those people by rehabilitating them. That's the point. That's the point. My mentor, the late R. Eugene Pincham, used to tell me that rehabilitation is not one of the favorites of the system, even though now, I will say this now, moving ahead, we're moving in that direction because of the fact of overcrowding, and also because we got more educated officers that are getting college degrees, associates and bachelors. And so anyway, the point of the matter is we're moving out of the deterrent issue to the point of addressing the reasons why a person is there. But Eugene Pincham used to say that they don't want to do rehabilitation because if these people don't return to the system, because let me tell you, from the time I started practicing law in 1978 to the time I actually retired in 2000, and then times I still observed after that, there were people that I represented, I should say from the beginning, that I represented over and over and over because of lack of rehabilitation. And I also saw generational criminals. That is, the children of the clients I represented, the nieces and the nephews, and so forth. And so the point of the matter is that crime was perpetuated. But if you deal with rehabilitation, then you begin to cut in that. And he said that they didn't want to do that because that meant that those individuals who work in the system, like some lawyers, some judges, some correction officers, and all of them would probably be cut down in numbers and would have to get other jobs. So basically, they would say that to sentence an individual and not treat the problem or rehabilitate them provided customers, so I say, that kept them employed. You begin to understand. And so people say, I said, well, you just pay attention to what's happening. And I've seen that over and over. So anyway, moving right ahead. Just desserts. That means what it says. You get what's coming to you. So then punishment is commensurate with the seriousness of the offense. So the more severe the crime, the more severe the sentence should be. It's called just desserts, getting what's coming to you. Restorative justice is a movement towards rehabilitation where repairing the harm done, the offender makes amends or harm or loss to the victim and or community, such as community service, such as paying a fine or something like that, those kinds of things. That's when you get into that area. All right. So restorative justice is basically like a civil case. You try to make that person whole, and you pay them, give them money, or you do a service or something to try to fix you up. You might, for example, in your community service, if you, for example, committed a hate crime, you might be forced to work with, let's say if it's on an African American Operation Push, NAACP, or Urban League, one of those kind of things, all right? And if it's based on a person who, so they give you sensitivity training as well as subjecting you to working with people so that you begin to learn more about them. The equity goal of punishment, and the equity goal of punishment is offenders have to pay back the victims for their loss. That's the same thing as what I was talking about earlier, and the justice system for the cost of processing their case and society for their crimes. So that is what we talk about when we say the equity goal. Concurrent sentence. This is a sentence that runs alongside. For example, a person convicted of 2 or more crimes, and it has to be 2 or more crimes, and the sentences begin on the same day, are completed, when the longest one runs. Let's say, for example, if a person is sentenced to 3 40-year terms, all right? And so 3 40-year terms equal 120 years. Now, if it's concurrent, that means for each day that they serve, the first 40-year sentence, they'll be serving the second and third at the same time. And so that's how it operates. So, you know, and sometimes it's reported a person they get 120 years. Well, in reality, they're not. They're getting 40 years, and then if they have good behavior, if they have good day for a day, then they'll get 20, and then for further good time, they'll cut off 5. So all those things are now factors in terms of sentencing. So you begin to understand what concurrent is. Consecutive, on the other hand, means what it says. You finish one sentence, and then the second one completes. So on the other hand, let's say you got 3 40-year terms to run consecutive. That means you finish the first one, and then you do the second one, and then you do the third one. So even with good time, you're going to spend at least 60 years or close to that in time. All right. And we're just about done. We're a little over our time. Determinate sentencing, we've already talked about that. But again, a fixed term of years established by law or the legislature. That's what I was talking about. And then indeterminate is early release from a correctional institution after they've served a required minimum portion of the sentence. So then they are released then from that point. And then sentencing guidelines, we've talked about that, based on severity of the crime and the offender's criminal background. Remember I told you about pre-sentence investigations, PSIs, which I think is comes up. Presumptive sentencing guidelines, legislature sets the penalty for the criminal act. That's more like determinate as well. Mandatory minimum sentences, which means that you can't go under those specific years. Like I said, 6 to 30 for the Class X felony. 3 strikes law, that was the Habitual Offenders Act I was saying, that says that if an offender receives long sentence with no parole for a 3rd or more felony. And some jurisdictions use violent felonies as opposed to nonviolent felonies. Truth in sentencing means pretty much what it says. The offender serves a substantial portion of their sentence and reduce the discrepancy between the ignored sentence and actual time served. So in other words, you serve more time. There was once upon a time a person was sentenced for life. That meant that they were out within 2 to 3 years. But now life means life. And so that's the end of this exercise, as well as what I have wanted to cover with you. So I wanted to make sure that you got it. If you have any questions, type them in the chat box. If you don't have any questions, I wish you the best this week. Oh, I did say this. My bad. I got to go back because I want to make sure that since there is no lecture next week, I got to go and I want to at least run over the assignments for week 3. Sorry about that. I want to make sure that you get that. So here are the assignments. Restorative justice, which you know about now, and it's going to tell you in a 1 to 2 page paper, answer these 3 questions. And again, clicking on the rubric, and there it is. You view it, and it tells you exactly what it just said in a few minutes. It's a 1 to 2 page, and remember the same requirements that I set out before in this and this, all right? And then the other thing that you have is, of course, your discussion on intermediate sanctions. You're going to tell us what intermediate sanctions are. You're going to deal with that through your reading and research, okay? And then the final thing is your quiz, which, as I said again, is 10 multiple choice questions, and you'll have 1 minute per question, and that's your assignments for week 3. And then the next time I see you will be week 4. I will send you the PowerPoints, even though there's no lecture next week. I'll be sending those to you Sunday evening or Saturday. So, will I cover the difference between the 1st degree and 2nd degree? 2nd degree murder you're talking about? It doesn't matter in terms of, remember what happens. 1st degree murder and 2nd degree murder is called something different in each jurisdiction. Murder itself is generally considered as 1st degree murder. That means that the person committed the crime with malice and aforethought, and that means that mens rea, their mind is on the crime that they do, they plotted and planned and so forth. 2nd degree murder means that a person might have killed the person, but they might have close to what some jurisdictions call manslaughter. So it's a lesser included offense. Interesting point, in Illinois, the police officer who was found guilty of, Jason Van Dyke was found guilty of 2nd degree murder by the judge, even though he clearly committed 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, which was a mandatory Class X felony, which meant that he would have received more time. Well, because the judge went with the 2nd degree murder, believe it or not, he qualified for probation, which he did not get. But he did receive, I think, 10 years or 7 years, I believe it was, which means he's going to be out in 3.5 years. So the point of the matter is 2nd degree is almost like manslaughter, and it's not as severe. The sentence is less, but it depends on your jurisdiction that you're in as to what you call it. Does that clarify that for you? Got it? Got it? Okay. All right. All right. So with that, I'm going to say good night to each of you, and I will hope to see you in 2 weeks when we have our next session. Again, I remind students, and I say it again, you don't get extra points for coming to the lecture, but what you did do was get extra information that helps you and clarification for it. And, you know, I'm going to just tell you this, and then I'm going to be done. This course, the school requires me to do 1 lecture, which meant I could do the lecture last week, and I won't lecture anymore for the rest of the next 10 weeks. I said, that's not right. So I committed myself to going with what I say, to helping my students by doing lectures weeks 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Now, I used to do lectures every week, but because the turnout was either 1, 2, or none every week, it was counterproductive for me to do that. And so I will continue to do my lectures until they change this course. As I said, next quarter they're supposed to change it to a shorter one. And when they do it 6 weeks, when they do 5.5 weeks, then I will be doing a lecture every week. And then students will have to attend or listen to the lecture, you know, like you have in some other classes, and you'll have a keyword. We don't have that here. So that I do say to students, consider the fact that yours truly goes the extra mile for you guys. So guess what? If I have somebody that's going to help me to get to the honor roll and dean's list, I'm going to do that. And that's what. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brother Presley. Pastor Brother Presley down in Florida. Thank you so much. I've talked to both of these students that are here in this lecture, and thank you, Catherine. Catherine has shared with you guys already, and I'm not saying anything extra, that she put in the open house that she is I think a 72-year-old grandmother. Did I say that right? Did I say that right? Yep. So I think that's so awesome. I always tell people, I said, this is, and I told Catherine this, it's no secret, that it doesn't matter how old you are, just keep learning. Knowledge is power and wisdom. And certainly Catherine is one, in those 72 years, you have to have some wisdom to get that far. And so I appreciate your input. Yep. You see what Brian has said? Yes. And so it's awesome. It's awesome. I love it. I love it. Though I told her this is the first time I've ever had a student who was older than me. But hey, I love it. I've had you know, so so thank you guys again, and I'm going to say good night to you. And you know, if you see any of your classmates, which sometimes people do even though they're online, tell them, say, hey, look, let me tell you something. I learned you need to be going to checking out those lectures or either listen to the recording, because and I can tell. So students that will come to me with a question, I say, go back and listen to the lecture. And I'm not being rude with that, but what I am telling them is that I've already given the answer. You just have to go get it, and it will be there. And if you, after that, you go through it and you need further clarification, then I will provide it. So at least put the effort in. Hey, if I'm going to put in the time to do this extra, then you want to at least show some appreciation of that extra effort by at least utilizing that. That's kind of like the way I see it. So, amen. That's right. Thank you, Catherine. I think Brother Ryan would say amen to that too as well. So, with that, good night, guys, and have a great week. Great 2 weeks.